and welcome to today's Adobe Apps for Education session. Both our sessions today will be focused on InDesign, and the first one will be led by Lucas Engqvist from Sweden, who's one of our Adobe education leaders. And Lucas has worked in the print industry for a very long time before returning to teaching, and he's got an amazing wealth of knowledge around InDesign. He's like my InDesign hero. So I'm really excited today to have Lucas here to do this. So I think I should probably throw to Lucas. Are you there?
Yes.
We'll just get ready and set up if you wanted to share. If you have any questions for Lucas, please ask them in this top pod, and we will, because time is short, ask the questions in here, and at the end of the session we'll answer them. Or if you are in the session and you want to answer them, please feel free to do so as well. So I can see Lucas is ready, so I'm going to hand over to you. Are you there, Lucas?
Yes, I'm here, and I'm going to try and do this a little bit of a life on the edge. For me, InDesign, I've been working with InDesign, as people were saying, in the print industry for a long time. And then somebody showed me this DPS, and I could actually put InDesign on the iPad, and I got really, really excited. And what am I going to be able to share in half an hour? I'm going to be able to share all my mistakes. Well, not all of them, because that will take too much time. But I wanted to give you a little bit of the two alternatives that we have. DPS started working, and I'll make the presentation first in DPS. We will be looking at the presentation in InDesign, and we will be looking at the presentation in EPUB as well, because there are some differences and similarities between EPUB and DPS, and which road you choose, that is what I hope you will be able to tell by the end of the session. DPS used to be available single edition for all Creative Cloud subscribers, but in the summer the licensing was changed, but we can still make DPS from InDesign to the iPad. But let's look at it on the iPad. That's really why we wanted DPS. So I'm going to switch to Reflector here, and you see it's the same screen that you had on the InDesign document. And I will now scroll vertically, and you cannot see my finger when I'm using Reflector, but here we have a little kind of chart, and I know there are limits on this one to explain it. But when we want to publish something on an iPad, there are several different alternatives to choose. We can make a web page provided with no Muse or web program, or we can code it, and it can be responsive. It doesn't necessarily have to be responsive, but it will change as the user is changing either the orientation or zooming in or zooming out. And it does support usually sound and video and animation with HTML5. It does support buttons and forms, and I put that in a little bit of a yellow one, because buttons and forms does of course mean that there is something to receive the form, but buttons are definitely supported on the web. We use them all the time. EPUB there's two versions of EPUB. There's something called EPUB fixed layout, and there's something called normal EPUB. And EPUB will reflow, but fixed layout EPUB won't reflow. And you can see we do have sound, video, we do have animation, and we do have buttons. We don't have easily accessible forms because we have with the web we can change that too. So, I mean, all of these things, there is always a if and but I'm going to try and be brief. That's the hard part. There is the DPS, and it is a little bit reflowable because I can change my screen to be horizontal or vertical, and so there is a certain kind of responsiveness on the digital publishing suite. And but otherwise, it's really a fixed layout. We do have great sound and video support. We do have animation, no, but actually we have slideshows, so we can fake an animation. I will show that a little bit later. We do have a limited support for buttons, but what a DPS uses is something called overlays. We could also make a PDF file which has much of it can be reflowable. That's why it's both a no and a yes. Normally a PDF isn't reflowable, but we can actually make a reflowable PDF as well. And then sound and buttons and things like that. Flash And here Joseph will probably tell me I'm totally wrong, because Flash is possible to do anything with Flash. You can make it reflow, you can make forms, you can make buttons, you can make applications, and even Connect that we're using now is basically run on Flash. So of course we can do everything that we need to do in Flash, but it's a little bit harder to do, especially from InDesign. So this chart is actually showing what we can do from InDesign. Now, as you notice, I'm looking at this one, we're scrolling this one vertically, and we're actually going through something which is called an article. An article, and here we see what I'm planning to talk about today. And we will look at the overview of this one and the formats. We've already done that, and I will soon go into the workflow. And the workflow, oh look, there it is on my first article. So as you see the group, whoops, there I managed to slip on my computer, sorry, on the iPad, the workflow, and I'm scrolling vertically, and there we can see the workflow. We work in InDesign, we send it to something called Folio Builder, and from Folio Builder we can push it via the USB cable or via Adobe Creative Cloud account to the DPS viewer and look at the what we have created. Or once we know that we have what we want, we can put it through the Folio publisher, and then we need an Apple developer license, and there's a whole legal thing, and then we can publish the app so that it can be viewed by many. And some larger institutions really like this, and then you're actually publishing it. But for me, as coming to printer, I would say that if you go into the publisher and you actually want to make the app available on the App Store, it's almost a bit like going to the printing press. You can work in InDesign, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have a printing press, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you know actually how to print in the printing press. Here we can actually see a button, so if I press this button, I'll go back to the top. Oh yes, there we have the startup screen. So this is my second story where I have some samples, and we will go into this one and look at the workflow even more. So as I actually move into this one, let's look at the planning. This is the important part. The planning has two parts. The one part is in InDesign, where we have to plan the document in articles, and you can see the vertical lines here where it says the InDesign documents. You would make several pages, and each article is a separate document. And I will leave the iPad there and go back to InDesign so we can see the documents. Here is my first article, there is my second article, there is my third article, and there is my fourth article. So the articles, they are the vertical bars that I was showing. So let's go back to this image, but this time I'm going to go back to it in InDesign. Here is my planning page. So from InDesign, I will then go into the Folio Builder. This is the Folio Builder. And in Folio Builder, I have made a demo, a basic, and we can see there's actually a computer icon showing it's a local demo. It means that I don't have to be online to be able to work on this demo. And since I was traveling when I was making this, that was very practical. Some of these don't have a computer icon. They need me to be logged in to be able to work and to be accessible for me. And some of these ones, you see, are shared. This one is Matthias Kleisner in Holland who made this one, and he wanted to share it with me. So I can actually share a folio while I'm making with somebody else to collaborate. Now, if I go into this basic DPS portfolio that we see, and let's click in here, we can see, okay, there are my articles. First article overview, planning, creating, testing, and resources. And these articles, they're all in landscape layout, and these are actually my documents. The first article, and you see the first tab here is the first article. The planning and creating, this is the one I call the second article. The testing, well, that's my third article. And then I have my fourth article, which is the resources. Now, if you think I'm going too fast, I'm going to put this on the Adobe Education Exchange as the source files, and you'll be able to click and play and upload it to your own iPad and play around with it. So that's being said, let me move on to the next page. And now, you see, I've switched to InDesign. Look here. We can do InDesign either horizontal or vertical. And you can see some things are dimmed out, and there's a button there. Let's switch back to the iPad and see what happens there. This is the screen. I'll flip on to the next one. Yes, I've tried to make things simple. This presentation I've made is just on horizontal presentation. I just have horizontal documents. My first, second, third, and fourth document. But they will be imported into the iPad as a constant flow. You didn't see any pages shift as I scroll up and down, yeah? So that's why I've drawn them as a solid line. Now, if I would click on the button where it says vertical, you can see, oh, so I have to make, if I want a DPS file to be responsive, I will need to make 2 times the number of documents. For this presentation, if I wanted to be horizontal and vertical, it would mean that I'd have to make 8 sets of articles. Now, there is something in InDesign which is called an alternative layout, and so we can actually make both these articles online. But let's look at how I also structure this to be as flexible as possible. There is something in InDesign called the book feature. And the book feature, it means that I can collect my documents. When you go out to make file, new document, you can choose to make a new book. And it would make a blank book. And what I've done is put my first article as the first chapter in that book, the second article as the second chapter, the third article in the third chapter, and the fourth article as the fourth chapter. This means I actually have 2 options. I can keep working on my DPS as it is, but if I want to open the third article, I can just double-click in the book file. So this is like a small file manager. The other little advantage I have is I didn't have to decide if I wanted to make an EPUB or if I wanted to make a DPS, because while not selecting any of the articles, I can go from the flyout menu, and there I can export the book to an EPUB. Now, the difference if I'd export this one to an EPUB, let's do it. And I'll just save it there on the desktop and replace it so I get the actual current one. And I'll just take the default settings on there. Now, an EPUB is a little bit like a DPS, but the EPUB I can just upload via iBooks or send to an EPUB reader. And these EPUBs that I export in this way from the book menu will be a fixed layout EPUB. And the fixed layout EPUB is a little bit simpler to use. The difference is it doesn't have any vertical scrolling in the same sense as we had the other one. It just has my horizontal scrolling. I'll see if it opens up here. So there we have our EPUB. This is the last one. I'll take the one I did yesterday. I'm sorry about that. But we can see it's the same material, and when I'm shuffling through the pages, I'm only going in the vertical direction. There is no horizontal direction. Sorry, I'm getting my horizontal and vertical mixed up. I'm only going horizontally like a traditional book. The advantage is, of course, I can have buttons in a different way so that I can have interactivity by nesting also buttons and things like that. So there's a lot of things that we can have in the EPUB, which we can still have in the DPS. Let me go back to the iPad. That's where we started. Hope you don't think it's too much jumping back and forth. So we understand the structure in the DPS is more like a tree, whereas the structure in the EPUB is a linear structure. Actually, a tree structure is more like a website, right? Now, if I looked at the EPUB at this animation page, and I wanted to show you the animations, let's go down to this page. I'll just go forward to the animation page. And here I can change the color, and it just switches it across, but I can start off an animation like a propeller, yeah? Now, animations, I said I didn't have in DPS, and there are plenty of tricks, and you will find some resources to be able to make this. Let's go to the iPad. The change color button will work, and I get sort of this fading over. So I can change the state of an object, change the colors. But when I try to press my animation, nothing happens. But if I make a button to change the state, I can make several still pictures, which is almost like an animation. And if I start the slideshow, I can fake the animation as well. And as I said, you want to try these, I will put them up on the Exchange. You'll have the full source and you can play with it. Now on my iPad, this page is totally dead. But the animations on the iPad with the EPUB, let's move over there. There we have the animations, we have the propeller, and we can even nest the propeller to the aeroplane, and we have a full movement. So there are some fun stuff we can do with EPUB. So why on earth do a DPS? Well, there's something called an image sequence that we can't have. This is an image sequence of a scanning, and film will still work on the EPUB, but let's look at the image sequence. The image sequence means I can push my button and I can sort of run through backwards and forwards in time and play with the timeline in a different way. And that gives me a feeling that this DPS is alive. And that kind of interactivity is a little bit what we're missing in the EPUB, and that's why we may want to do the DPS. Other features that we do have as overlays are like pan and zoom, which means I can click on a picture and I can sort of zoom out on it or zoom in on it depending on how it's made. I can have scrollable text, and yes, it's Arabic done in English, in the English version of InDesign, but I'll show you that one later. And I can also do like a 365 vision. So those are the fun things that I can do in DPS that I cannot do on the EPUB. This is a simple, a slideshow where I can, or a portfolio where I'm clicking some small icons to change the image. So let's go back and look at this in the InDesign document. Pip, you tell me if I'm going too fast. Let's go here to the image sequence and the audio. When we are working in InDesign and we want to play around with these things, and this is really the only way to get to know how to think about EPUB and digital publishing, to actually play and make something and see what it does, and then go back, test it on your iPad and see what happens. Now, let's put this book away for a minute, and I will look here at the specific tools that we use. If I change my workspace in InDesign from Window, Workspace, and Digital Publishing, and I'll reset the Digital Publishing. Actually, let me just save this workspace first. I'll save this as DPS for my sake, so that I can get it back exactly as it is at this moment. But the general Digital Publishing suite, it will look like this. It will include some tools. Let's see if I can get this one to zoom in. We have something called object states, buttons, folio overlays, hyperlinks, and media. And media means video and sound. Hyperlinks means that I can link to the net or to another page. A folio overlay, well, that's basically all the interactive stuff on a DPS. Buttons and forms, well, they are shared between PDF, DPS, and EPUB, and even web export. The object states, they are like an object can have different appearances. If we think about water, water can be steam, and water can be water, or water can be ice. That's 3 different states. And the object states means that we can have almost like a layer of an object, and we can activate the chosen layer. And this is what really makes DPS fun. The image sequence, though, you will not find in many of the interactive things. They're only available in the overlays. In the overlays, we actually link to a folder with some PNG files, and actually have the PNG files for this one. It is a sprite sheet which is done in Illustrator with artboards. Here we see the Illustrator artwork. Let's just zoom out on this one. So this is just a series of artboards that are exported as a PNG file, and this one I've actually taken from Wikimedia and applied some Illustrator fun on it. And showing each image in sequence is what's giving the animation. The same thing goes, let's go back to InDesign, sorry. The same thing goes for the 365 that I have here. This image here is linked to a folder, which is a series of PNG files. And if we look at Illustrator to make one of these, it's a panorama sample. I'll open that one up in Illustrator. And with no crash, we can see it's basically just 6 squares, like being on the inside of a die, where squares 1, 2, 3, and 4 are the sides of the die. The square number 5, where I have the dragonfly, is my roof, and where the cockroaches or bugs are is my floor. So just exporting those as PNG files, that's all I had to make these two interactive areas, which I showed previously. This is a scrollable frame, which is basically a text frame that is too big, pasted inside a smaller frame, and then when I've applied those, I will say I want it to be scrollable. Now, the way it works in InDesign is basically the folio overlay will give you a hint actually how to make these different scrollable things. So if I take this one here and let's no, sorry, I will actually link to a resource which has much better explanations of the details of this that's coming afterwards. And please feel free to ask. I feel I need to keep moving on. This one here is a group of pictures that is imported, and they are what is called a multi-state object. And if I press on this one, you'll see that pressing on this group, and we see it's a group because it's a dashed line, there's like lots of layers on the group, and I can choose which layer is visible here. And I've named them tree, bridge, alien, and gull, boat, etc. And then I have made a series of buttons here that I have linked and saying when I press this button, I want to go to the state called waves, because this is the small image on the picture. Now, just to make another button here, here we have an image that is not a button, it's the pier. So I can just press this one, say I want to make this into a button, either by pressing here on the convert to button, or I can say I want to make it into a button. And when I make it into a button, I can choose the action from the plus, and I can say make this one to a go to state, and I say this should go to the state of the object slides. That's the name I gave this multi-state object. And I don't want to show the tree, I want to show the pier. Oops, let's see if I can manage to do that. Yeah, now it says pier. And this time clicking this button will make the pier visible. Now let's just show briefly the quick way that is really nice with the EPUB. There's a small preview button right underneath here. So from the buttons panel, I can actually preview what an EPUB would look like. Now, just the buttons I know will work in some ways on the DPS the same as they do in EPUB. Let's see if I get it up there. So the pier wasn't a button in my original, and when I press it here, you see it's a button that moves to the pier. Let's go back to my third article. My third article was called Testing. So when I've planned my work and I've created all my overlays and buttons and interactive stuff, then I want to test it, and that's really important. Just test it, do a small change, test it again. And if I'm doing EPUB, sometimes that's a good entry point to see if I want to do digital publishing anyway. And I can test it very easily because I also have the animations and the timing panels, and I will test it by just pressing this button here called EPUB. Now, how do I test a digital publishing suite and to see if it will work in the DPS? Well, either I can test the article that I'm working at by going in the folio overlay, and from the bottom, I can choose preview. And if I have a device connected via USB, and I'm not sure about Android, sorry, I don't have the answer on that one. But if I press down here, and this is a quirky interface because sometimes it will pop up directly and sometimes it's a little bit stubborn. There the pop-up menu came. It says preview on the desktop or preview on Lucas's iPad. So I can choose to prove this one on my desktop or on my iPad. So even without an iPad, let's preview this test screen. And I turn my test screen on, and you see when the test screen goes on, it opens the content viewer, which is sort of the preview of the digital publishing suite. It's not on my iPad at all. And here you see we actually have a slideshow of a blinking ellipsis, which is basically the flashing thing. It seems a little bit buggy here as well. It wasn't as buggy on the iPad. But you can actually test your iPad application without having an iPad. Now, this is just testing. If you test from the folio overlay viewer, which is right down at the bottom, you can test all your interactivity but it will only test the current article that you're working on. If you want to show the whole story, if we go back to this overview thing that we had, let's go back to the bottom of this one. No, sorry. On the second article we had in the beginning, the overview. You remember that it's made up of several different articles. And if I want to show all the articles at the same time, I will have to go from the folio builder and use the preview button from here. And it would be exactly the same thing. Because we're short on time, I won't test it on my iPad at the moment, but the preview button, it would get me testing on the iPad. Now, so we've gone through the stages that we had before. We had the overview of the digital publishing, and we talked about the formats, HTML being accessible for web designers. The EPUB, I think, is going to be the big one that is coming in the future. Digital Publishing Suite has a few slick features that you can't get from the EPUB, but of course it needs a licensing, and it needs a developer license from Apple to be able to publish or print it out. And that was the workflow and the testing. What I promised also was some resources. So, whoops, it's a live InDesign document, so we can do lots of funny stuff with that, editing it. What I've included in this document are the links. There is a great book by Diane Burns and Sandy Cohen about digital publishing, which actually goes in depth on these ones. And if this little brief demo has made you excited about these things, and you test these things and you say you want to go deeper, I'd really recommend this one. They have it both as a digital book and as a printed book. Sometimes it's nice when you're working with EPUB to have a printed book, so you can sort of change worlds, otherwise everything becomes mixed up. Sandy Cohen, also, who's an author, she has a great book on just animations in InDesign, and that one I really, really recommend. You can also download from the help site a step-by-step guide on how to upload and publish on the App Store. Now, two other apps that I really would like to recommend, and let me just switch them to the iPad so that you can see the apps live. I'll just go out of this application. The one is the English edition of DPS Tools. It's made by Ronald de Becker, and it explains each of the folio overlays and what they do. And this one is totally free. He is so much better than me at this, but he is not crazy enough to try and do this in half an hour. And here it explains exactly how each of these overlays work in details. And because this is free and available on the iPad, why should I explain this to you now? It's better you play with it yourself. It's better I do the overview stuff, right? The other app, which costs a little bit of money, is the DPS, absolutely DPS, which is also made using both layouts. Now, this is done a very creative way because when I'm looking at these articles, it shows lots of sample works of how things are done. And just by twisting my iPad to the horizontal view, I get the 1-2 step on how to do these things. So I will see a sample on the horizontal, and the vertical is how to do exactly that sample. A great resource. Now I see it's time for questions we have to round off. But I hope that at least showed you the difference between DPS and EPUB and got you a little bit eager about testing and seeing that just hooking up your iOS device to the computer that you're running your InDesign on, you can test and play and find out which way is the right way to publish on a digital tablet for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucas. Awesome. You have got away with very lightly with just one question, and that question is from, oh no, there's two. Can you create an EPUB with InDesign in CC, or do you have to use the DPS? That's the first question. Hello, Lucas. Ah, I've lost Lucas. Okay, and then what version of InDesign are you using? And he was using CC, I'm pretty sure. So I will, can you create, I don't know if Mark might know that one actually. I'm not too sure, I'm not a great InDesign user. So we will have to answer that one maybe in the last. Oh, Lucas is back. Where did he just pop back in? Yay! Sorry. There you go, Lucas. That's okay. You should be right now, Lucas, to just answer that question for us.
There were just too many windows on the display, and I managed to close the wrong one. Oh yes, I love tech.
That's okay.
We love it. And let's see, what was the question?
Can
Where
you
do we have
create
some?
EPUB with InDesign? Can you create EPUB with InDesign in CC, or do you have to use DPS?
No, I mean the EPUB in InDesign is has been supported for a long time. From the CC 2014, last year's edition, EPUB became, I mean, this one that I showed just recently here on the iBooks, when I exported from the book to export to EPUB, that was an EPUB done totally in InDesign. So um, without trying to reveal too much, I can say I think EPUB is much simpler to develop with InDesign, but you can make it so that you can test both. Since 2014, you go into any of the animation, the buttons, or the timing panels, and you press the preview, and it will preview the EPUB. And this is the one that you can upload to iBooks directly. And you can do
Thank you.
animations, you can do nested animations and everything. In
Excellent.
one sense, I
And
almost wish I'd
which
explained that instead. But we'll have to do
And
another session for that.
just quickly, Lucas, what version of InDesign were you using?
I was using CC 2014. So CC
Excellent.
2014 has the EPS. If you go to an older InDesign from CS6 or CS 5.5, from CS 5.5 to CC, not the 2014, you can make the digital publishing suite from straight away via the USB cable to an iOS device or share it via an Adobe ID.
Thank you. So this afternoon at 3 p.m. PDT, whatever time that is in your zone, Lucas will be back to show us how we can create some fillable forms with InDesign. So I'm sure you'll really enjoy that. So come back at 3 p.m. and learn how to make some forms using InDesign. So Lucas, thank you so much for that this morning. I know I've learned something out of that, as always. And
I hope
once
so.
again, I'm reminded that you really are the InDesign guru of the universe. So thank you very much for that.
Can I give a quick tip just before you can record it
Absolutely.
or not?
Yes,
Yes,
please.
you saw the Arabic scrollable text. Now I know we are international, we're a global AEL society, and sometimes we want the things, and it really I got so excited when I saw that. Many of you maybe know the fill with placeholder function that we have in InDesign. Now just hold the command or control button down when you press fill with placeholder text, and you get to choose the language. You can do Hebrew or Arabic or Japanese or Korean, whatever you like, and it's just so much more fun than seeing all the lorem ipsum text.
That's
Thank you
cool.
for
I
that.
like it. Alrighty, everyone. Have a great day. And we'll see you back here in about 5 hours, 6.5 hours.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that.
Okay. So have a
Okay.
great day, everyone. We'll see you
See you
then.
later.
Thank you, Lucas. I'll be
Okay.
back
Bye
about
bye.
half an hour before. Bye bye, everyone.